Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. What a pleasure to see you all here in this session, Investing in a Climate-Adapted World. My name is Tian Wei, all the way coming from Beijing, China. I'm a TV host. It's such a pleasure to be the moderator for this afternoon's event. And before we start to introduce the distinguished panelists who are going to help us to understand this topic better, let me do a little bit background about why we want to discuss this question and why we're having the solutions that we're going to present to you today. Reasonable minds in the world all understand the threat of climate change. We understand it's not something in the distance, but rather right around the corner if you look at the natural disasters happening in our world, just over the past few months, in fact. The floods going on in India, the drought sub-Saharan countries, and also you see the hurricane in the United States, the things going on in France, Japan, many other countries, the list go on. So we know it's important to deal with climate change, so we invest in clean energy, renewable, but there's one thing that we really need to do, that is adapt and also how to work on the resilience. That is why we're having this distinguished panelists with us today, who are policymakers, climate leaders, as well as coming from international organizations, helping us to find out the solution. And this is my great honor to introduce to you about them one by one. Laura Tuck, Vice President for Sustainable Development with the World Bank. Laura, good to see you. And we also have David Paul, Minister in Assistance to the President and Environmental Minister of the Republic of Marshall Islands. Good to see you, David. Norbert Bartley, who is the Parliament Secretary of BMZ with Germany. Good to see you, Mr. Vice Minister. Matthew Rycroft, Permanent Secretary with DFID, UK. Good to see you, sir. Last but certainly not least, he's on his way while we are introducing this panel, running all the way to our venue, Petri Talas, who is the Secretary General of World Meteorological Organization. Good to see you, finally. So let's start by taking a look at a video we have prepared to you to understand better why we are discussing it and what exactly are we talking about. Take a look.
Dangance da munan da duka mutanenmu na nan karkara zaman noman nan ne da kiwo da inda sun ka samu tabarbarewa to kwancan karin babu ta
ay minan tabu na pain kilipes ay ro na mekin ki kanga naruni ya busin tari kanga yera ita ben ki na ko yaite Citanu Sakroy at Ayabe and a token ngai Nana Comitamin Napere.
Lokacin da muka tasa tunda abubuwan da muke da mun kasa su basi.
Aria Ponsan and Rotera Tari Aria Ponye Kinaquan, Napin. Anere Kangarigin Didigana. I haven't done in Tarika Manipo. Segundo taki yay pangaira yay nasira orak masata yay teneneran naniki sepu ya katwa wiki orak ya
sai ka kana jingiran ga zaka tsallace a kare iyalinka to har na tayi na bar su hankali na bashi kwance kullu yau ina cikin lissafin mi na baro bayana
sirang kakainan wa teran naron tetepo te kuka kain ka bene sikene ni kain nami menteran angaya te agina kare nang to tepam masa taya sini ngaron
labarin proje mun same daga community mu ta Kwarnaka aka ce wani proje ya zo ana ce mishi faka RC sun ba mu iri mai sauri sun ba mu rogo yanzu ko da rayuwa ta zan halin yau yana tare da iyalina na ga sun ka ce ni kan kana hankali na ya kwanta hiye da
narin ti oraki kanga ay saka ay ngai konan ka para sa pundaki konan ni mga raronen nararan pare ya punikaan
gonakana na rogo dai eka 2 da rabi ne. In ka sa rogo shi kenan sai zai gaba da rayuwar shi. Yanzu cikin bisa ribar na samun bisa wanga fanni na wanga noman rogo da wanga noma iri mai gaugawa nan, to yanzu bakin gwalgwado duk irin matsalolin aka cikin kalar ga yanzu ba san kwanan sai shi wanga iri mai gaugawa gudunmawa ta da gance da karamcin ruwa mutane an kusa mace magana a ta riga an kusa mace wannan wuri.
Naroni bibita kini kanwani poong yon na tera kiribes sinariyain ngaira ikiribes inda nangoy kaangangan ni katen ayan naron na sinunoriya.
Sauran karin da aka gare ni ga sauran mutane na duniya su tabbatar da akwai canji yanayi ya zo ne da kanshi ba sako bane ya zo da kanshi ne. Kenan yanzu ya kamata mu da muka gani muna ta kowa da wanga abu kowa shi kashe kwance da ba warkewa da wanga canji yanayi ana warkewa gare shi an ta tsaye.
A farmer from distant is helping us to understand we need to act together and adapt. Having our arms folded will not help. But Laura, you have to tell us what exactly is the World Bank is working on right now. Earlier we see 7.7 billion. That's the money being used right now. Where? For adaptation.
Well, thank you, Wei, and good afternoon, everybody. Let me just start by saying the World Bank's mission is to reduce poverty, and helping them adapt to climate change is going to be a critical part of that. If we stand with our arms folded, or if we keep going the way things are, this climate change threatens to reverse the development gains we've had over the past decades. We've done some analysis that shows that if we keep going the way we're going, 100 million more people could be in poverty in just the next 15 years. And as you said earlier, we've been seeing droughts and floods and higher sea levels and fires and hurricanes and so forth. And just last week when the IPCC report came out, and what it said was, these things are going to get worse, and they're going to get worse even if we only warm by 1.5 degrees. If we go to 2 degrees, they'll be far worse. And the NDCs, the Paris commitments that were made for the Paris Agreement, put us on a path to 3.5 degrees. So we also know that the poor are the most affected, and particularly the most disadvantaged and the most vulnerable, those in the least developed countries, the small island states, indigenous people, and so forth. So the global community really has to come together and focus on mitigating climate change and reducing these impacts, but at the same time, we know that it's inevitable. So if we want to reduce poverty, we have to work on this. So the World Bank has been and is changing completely the way it's doing business. So last year, we did a record $20.5 billion in climate-related finance, which is more than double what we did before Paris, and exceeded the targets. We had set targets for 2020, and we exceeded them early. But what was interesting is we doubled the amount that we put into adaptation. So as you said, $8 billion, which was only about 3.9 the year before. And of all of our climate benefits, half is going for mitigation and half for adaptation. And so what we want to do is really push on this adaptation agenda. So today we are announcing a new adaptation and resilience action plan, where we really want to just change the way we do business so that adapting to climate change is built into everything we do. We're going to look at the impact of climate on our projects, and we're going to look at the impact our projects have on climate. And we're going to build these into the design, so if we build a school, it's going to be able to withstand weather events. If we do agriculture, it'll be climate smart with resilient seeds or using less water. If we build roads, they'll be able to be resilient if there are big storms, and so on and so forth. So every single project in every single sector will have this built in. And we're working with our colleagues at IFC and MEGA to really try to bring the private sector into financing adaptation, because to date, most of the private sector money has gone to mitigation and the public sector has really had to finance adaptation. And we're going to put up new metrics so that we can track, monitor, and track what we're doing. We're going to increase the amount of money we're going to spend, but we also want to see the progress we make. And when we talk about resilience, we're not just talking about physical resilience. We're talking about new mechanisms also to help countries manage climate and disaster risk, because we know that disasters push about 26 million people into poverty every year, and they cost economies something like $300 million a year. So with Germany and with the UK, we are launching something called the Global Risk Financing Facility, or GRIF, which is the whole point of this is to increase the resilience of vulnerable countries. We call it early finance for early action, that we hope will really help mobilize responses quickly after we see a climate shock or a natural disaster. And this will support the goals of the INSU Resilience Global Partnership. And we hope over time we'll be able to move it to a wider range of crises. And we've already mobilized about $145 million for this. So let me just stop there, and we can come back to that if we want more details.
Okay. Thank you, Laura, for helping us understand that globally speaking, World Bank is having an overall plan about adaptation.
Mm-hmm.
But today, we're also announcing this beautiful partnership World Bank's having with the UK and Germany about immediate actions, what to deal with crisis when it comes to adaptation. But let me have the countries and the regions that's going to be immediately impacted as a result of this, coming from Marshall Islands, Mr. Minister, and also the assistant for the president. I mean, your country, I was reading a little bit information about that before we came in, is now experiencing the impact of climate change. The clean water underground in your country now is affected by the so-called huge tide. And also some of the lands you have already lost to the water as a result of tide of climate change. So, Mr. Minister, help us to understand what exactly are the things that need to be done if the World Bank is thinking about helping, if the other countries are thinking about helping.
Yes, well, thank you, and good afternoon to you all. And I sit here in front of you not to be the expert in what we're trying to discuss here, because we really are in what we call uncharted territories, because we know the cost of what is, having an effect on the climate, and we're experiencing all these changes in the climate and climate change. But what the future holds is always a guessing game. What's coming up next? Because whether it's a drought, or whether it's a storm, whether it's a hurricane, whether it's a cyclone, and these are becoming more and more severe than before. Now, we don't know what the future holds, but we know what's causing it. So what we're saying is, can we do something about the cause that is actually causing these destruction and dismay across the globe? So in my country, for example, we continue to be faced with sustained drought. I mean, in the last decade or so, we could have our, the El Nino, La Nina effect. And so El Nino, most of the time, caused drought in northern part of the country. But then, by the time that usually before, we would see at least a 10-year span, and then we get another one. So by the time we'll be able to adapt and be able to recover. But in just a short span of time, by the time you get to recover, another one hit when it's come to drought, for example. The other one is we're losing not only that, but also with our ability to be able to sustain lives and communities in these islands, because of our water lengths are compromised. Because not only we're seriously getting affected by king tides, and the king tides are becoming more and more frequent than not, but also the water table, the water lines actually are being compromised, because in 12 years' time, based on some of the reports that are being circulated, that some of after the Marshall Islands or maybe entire country we won't be able to live in the Marshalls because of, the compromise of the water lines, that the water lines will actually come from underneath the land and just compromise the entire, and they probably won't be able to grow, vegetation will not be able to sustain or grow in that environment. So this is where we are experiencing now. As a country, we do not want to be sitting in a corner somewhere and cry and say, what continue to say, we're not the cause of this and we need you to do something. We are actually taking the lead. We just announced a couple of weeks ago, the president launched our 2050 strategy to accelerate our transition from fuel-based economy of fossil fuel into 100% renewable by 2050. That's one. And also on part of that 2050 strategy, we also have a very robust and ambitious national adaptation plan that will be finalized later on this year, and we will soon be filing it with the UNFCCC. And with these two very ambitious plans, we continue to demonstrate to the world that the least responsible, like the Marshalls, we are actually taking the lead. And what we will need is actually the assistance from the global community, whether it's through public finance investment or private equity investments. And I think that's where the partnership and the ability of the World Bank be able to galvanize and leverage some of these resources that they have in order to unleash some of the, especially private capital, that should be invested in our energy pathways to convert our energy sector into 100% renewable. Now, the challenge that we face as a nation is that through adaptation, we can almost guarantee that no private capital will ever be attracted to invest in adaptation because it just doesn't have any financial incentive at all. So what we want to do is we want to say, okay, let's leverage some of these money that comes from the IRA programs, and we can accelerate some of the investment into on the mitigation aspect of it to maybe leverage maybe different small island economies to create what we call an economy of scales, so private capital can be able to flow and be invested in some of these areas. Because in the Marshall Islands with 60,000 people, I don't think any serious capital will be ever flow into that particular market because it's just too small, and the costs are going to be so cost prohibitive. So those are the challenges we face. But let me just make two more important points here. Is in the Pacific, there is what we call the PCRAFI, or Pacific Catastrophe Risk Assessment and Financing Initiative. That it's really a good initiative and a good start, but it's really not complete because it's only covered only certain risk from natural disaster. But what we're faced with, like drought and king tides, doesn't even cover it under this one. And also there is this what we call insurance resilience. That is a partnership between the V20 and the G20. This is something that maybe the World Bank could actually complement because, you look at these two insurance initiatives, these are actually in place where the World Bank and the global financial community could actually help strengthen and complement rather than reinventing the wheel, so to speak.
Thank you very much, David. Adapt or perish, I guess that's the question you're facing every day in your country. Well, we see Marshall Islands is now crying in the corner, as you said, but rather thinking about the first, the second, and also already the third steps. So congratulations on that. Having said that, though, Mr. Vice Minister coming from Germany, Norbert, I have to go to you about that. There are so many mechanisms, initiatives, facilities we have been hearing, even today, just now, over the past 10 minutes. But how is this one that you are launching today, which is going to help us to deal with some real, immediate threats, and how they're going to help the real people? Norbert, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thank you, and good afternoon to you all. I think as a result of the climate change, we saw that the risk of natural disasters is increasing rapidly. So in November 2017, in Bonn, there has been the World Climate Conference with the V20 and G20, and as a result of this work, they established the INSO Resilience Global Partnership with finance ministers too from 48 vulnerable developing countries. So the goal of this initiative is to provide risk financing and insurance solutions for climate and disaster risks. And among other things, it will cover millions of poor and vulnerable people against the risk of climate change and extreme weather events by 2020. And being here in Indonesia, where 2 weeks ago a tsunami hit the coast and earthquakes are going on, we can see the importance of this agenda. We have learned in the last few years, if a country has financial systems like insurance and risk finance in place, it is better prepared and more resilient to disasters like storms, droughts, or floods. And we have already gained positive experience in the Caribbean, the Pacific, and Western Africa. A World Bank study tells us that $1 invested in preparedness helps save $4 in post-disaster spending. Risk finance puts a price on the risk and helps to make the right economic decisions, but more importantly, it also saves lives during and after a disaster. This is why in 2017 this initiative resulted the INSO Resilience Global Partnership for Climate and Disaster Risk Finance and Insurance. It is the major global initiative to help vulnerable countries and people to deal with climate risks and disasters before they happen, not just afterwards. In addition to the political groups of the G20 and V20 and other governments, the partnership brings together all main stakeholders, including international organizations and development banks, the private sector, civil society, and academia. The common goal is to prepare now for the future we are facing, to comprehensively deal with the increasing climate and disaster risks. We know that a game-changing political initiative needs a strong structure on the ground. This is why we are launching the Global Risk Financing Facility today, following very constructive work with our friends from the UK, the World Bank, the Marshall Islands, as the current V20 presidency. We see huge demand for an instrument like the GRIF and got encouraging signals from civil society organizations and the private sector to take this agenda forward. And I'm delighted to announce today in this audience that as part of our investments in the INSO Resilience Global Partnership, Germany is contributing 150 million euros to the GRIF. Thank you.
Thank you, Norbert, for this explanation and also input. Let me go to your colleague, Matthew, from the UK. So both Germany and the UK is involved in this facility, GRIF. How exactly your roles different or similar with one another? And also, overall speaking, what is the UK doing globally when it comes to adaptation and resilience building? Sir, go ahead.
Thank you very much. And I want to begin my answer to that question by going back to what I thought was a really powerful line on the video that we just saw at the beginning of this panel. Remember the voice that said, accept that climate change has come. Accept that climate change has come. So the first step is to accept that it has come and to recognize the need to take action, to take urgent action now, together. If collectively we do not act, if we do not adapt, then as Laura said, there are going to be 100 million extra people in poverty. And the role of DFID, the UK's Department for International Development, is to work with other donors from Germany, from around the world, to reduce poverty. So that's why we are in the business of acting on adaptation, on acting to improve resilience around the world, because there is a direct link between that action and action against poverty. We have already done a lot in this direction, but clearly a lot more needs to be done. And we have begun to prepare for the big summit that the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, has called for next year on climate. And he has asked the British Prime Minister to lead and to champion one big part of that agenda, which is precisely on resilience. So over the next year, we are going to be focusing on 3 big things that we hope that summit will do to create the necessary action on resilience. The first of those is to make sure that we mainstream resilience into investment decision-making. So I warmly welcome what Laura was saying about the Adaptation and Resilience Action Plan of the World Bank. It's a great example of that, and we encourage others to do likewise. The second thing is to build resilience to secure food, to secure water, to secure jobs through sustainable ecosystems and value chains. And the third big thing to do for that summit next year is to build resilience to cut the impact and the cost of natural disasters. So in the run-up to next year's summit, we will be convening a whole load of different ways to gather your ideas, your thoughts, your challenges, your inputs into this discussion so that we are able to act now, to act together. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Matthew. Let me go to the WMO representative here. Patry, the others have been talking about their own countries, their own initiatives, and the global approach toward the adaptation and resilience building. From your perspective, it seems that it is a science that we have to knock on your door to ask questions about. What have you and your organization over the recent past been doing about adaptation and resilience when it comes to science interactions with the global efforts now being made? Patry.
Thank you. First of all, thanks for the invitation to come and join you. I'm just coming directly from Arctic Ministers meeting, and I was flying 2 days to come here, so it's quite a change also mentally. So usually I'm a messenger of bad news, and I'm not planning to disappoint you also today. So we have just 2 more very recent reports published. Last Monday we published the most recent IPCC report on 1.5 degrees, and there was also very recent natural disaster report published a couple of days ago. And so far we have seen warming of 1.1 degrees, we have seen sea level rise of 26 centimeters, we have melted 75% of the Arctic sea ice mass, and the carbon dioxide concentration is today the highest in 3 million years, and we have also record high concentrations of methane and N2O.
Wait a minute. The list you give is as if it is nothing, but actually it is everyone on that list is dramatic impact on our lives. So what exactly those numbers mean for us?
Yeah.
And you're reading those, giving us the bad news, as you said at the very beginning.
Yeah, so I'm coming to that. Be patient. So, and then we have started seeing growing amount of disasters. It means more tropical storms, especially the most intense one. And we have also seen changes in the precipitation patterns. In some parts of the world it means flooding, and in some parts of the world it has meant drought problems. And we have seen threefold increase of the economic losses during the past 3 decades. And according to this recent disaster report, about 4.5 billion inhabitants of our planet have been exposed to natural disasters during the past 20 years. And Asia is a department store of disasters. Of course, we are in Indonesia, where it's an example of that. And most vulnerable countries are African countries, and it's Caribbean and Pacific countries, whereas the highest economic losses have been taking place in North America. Last year was the most expensive year. The hurricane season costed more than $200 billion. And we expect this negative trend in climate to continue for the coming 50 years anyhow. So by 2060, we might see a phase out of the negative trend if we are successful with the Paris Agreement implementation, especially this 1.5 degree target would be reached. And if not, by the end of this century, we expect to see 5 degrees warming, and sea level rise will continue until next century. So these are the facts behind climate science, and very powerful way to adapt to climate change, where we have to pay attention to, is to invest in early warning, weather, climate, and water services. And we have about 100 of our 91 member countries that don't have proper early warning services, and that means that their economies and their human beings are hit harder. And the good news is that we have excellent expertise in countries like UK and Germany available, and we have also very good forecast products available in global centers in Europe, North America, Japan, China, and our challenge is to transfer the know-how and these products to those 100 countries that don't have proper services. And for that we need financial resources, and we are very grateful for World Bank, Green Climate Fund, and European Commission that they have started investing in that field, and that's a very powerful way to adapt to climate change. And finally, if we don't do it, it's going to be an obstacle in reaching the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you.
Patri, if I could, a very brief follow-up. To what extent David can rely on the reports that you give on a constant basis to protect his homeland?
So if you ask about the science is very solid. So the message of the science community has been solid since the late 80s, and it has been more or less the same since then. But now we have started seeing the impacts of climate change, and that's why it's easier to convince the decision makers to act. And then the other side of the information are these forecasts on daily, seasonal, and decadal scales, and they have been dramatically improving, and we have fairly fancy products available in our developed members at the moment.
Thank you. Having said that, though, David, we heard the announcement of GRIF, but to what extent do you think you can effectively and on a short basis be able to tap into those resources, listening to what the others have been talking about, for a country like yours? Because we have case study only you sitting on the stage. The others are the ones that are helping to build this facility. So we have to rely on your words as to what are the things you need to go through, or what are the tasks you need to finish before you can tap into these resources. David?
Well,
so that Laura later can solve those problems for us.
Well, let me try to answer that. Before I answer that, I just wanted to make one point very clear. The IPCC report that just came out, a lot of people are saying, well, between 2 degrees and 1.5 degrees, it makes a huge difference. But when people try to explain it, they really talk in abstract. But let me just tell you from my perspective in the Marshall Islands, the difference between a 0.5 degree is a matter of life and death for the Marshallese people, is really an existential threat for the survival of the Marshallese people and a society and a culture. And that's why we need to accelerate investment in both adaptation and mitigation. The IPCC report is really only a validation of what we've been trying to say from the get-go. That's why we were so adamant in our effort when we were leading the charge back in 2015 for the Paris Agreement, that we need to make sure that 1.5 degrees, even right now, we're actually on a path to 3 degrees warming. And a lot of people are saying, well, the science is saying that even 1.5 degrees, it's going to be a lot of bad stuff are going to happen. But imagine that we're on path to reach 3 degrees. Imagine a world 3 degrees warmer. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to say, okay, how do we adapt to a world that will be, let's say, 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees warmer than what it is? It is really something that we cannot try to comprehend because, the science is telling us in 12 years, we really have only a 12-year window of opportunity to actually change the course that we actually are on. Because if not, we may go today, but you're next. So we may be the front line now, but in 12 years' time, it will be the next front line will be created, and then so forth and so forth. So that's why you need to act now. And we need all the, the help and the assistance that are out there for us to be able to, fight this together. Because really, this is our collective fight. It's not just the Marshall Islands and the vulnerable countries and small island countries like ours. So the leadership that we've actually been taking is that in November of 22nd of November, we are convening the world first ever global summit virtually. It is going to be a global, climate vulnerable forum grouping that is actually organizing a summit that is only online. So we're trying to we're trying to think outside of the box and try to gather the world leader by utilizing technologies that are available for us today. And instead of trying to travel all of these miles to create carbon footprint, we're saying that you can stay where you are and then go online and actually deliver a statement and trying to demonstrate to the world in solidarity that we can utilize these technologies that are available for us to be able to combat climate change and reduce greenhouse gas emission. So I just wanted to highlight that we are actually the presidency of
Right.
the Global Vulnerable Forum.
Right. We understand the V20 and the G20 have been working very closely together. Of course, that's another issue. We might go to the other panelists. But for you, David, I still want to ask you about that. One of the things people see, as you mentioned earlier, is the fossil fuels change in your country. But, I mean, for a national policy to change, even though your country is geographically small, but still, national policy to change, there's a lot of process that the country and the people need to go through in order to adapt and change. And there's also, examples like a roof change of households in order to get more natural energy. So help us to understand while you're doing this change, how you move things forward. I'm sure warning on TV would not help 100%, but what actually are the things you are doing so that people understand where the money is being spent and where to smartly spend the money? David, briefly from you.
Yeah, investing in renewable energy, for example, in the Marshall Islands, and not just in the Marshalls, but the entire globe, is really the biggest business opportunity of our lifetime. And I think if we can really translate that and say, okay, let's invest in renewable because the renewable energy is an infinite resource. And then if you invest in it, the profitability and the bottom line will continue to be profitable for foreseeable future. So I cannot stress the importance of trying and continue to invest in renewable because that resource, as I said, is infinite. If you invest in these continued finite resource like the fossil fuel and coals and all of that, these things are going to run out very soon, and then you're going to end up with stranded assets, and then at the same time you end up with a dirty environment. So which one is which? I think the smart investment will be in renewable, which is finite and is clean. So in the Marshall Islands, we are exactly doing that, the same thing by investing in renewable to get to 100% net zero emission by 2050. That's part of our 2050 strategy.
Okay, great. We got music already accompanying our conversation. This was even better. Norbert, you heard your colleague on your right side, the needs they have, the things they're dealing with every day. The question is, when you have GRIF, how is it going to really help when crisis is coming up and immediately, efficiently? That is the thing, because that's lives, right? And also, how is this going to be different from some of the earlier mechanisms which we have witnessed already, and which David mentioned in his long list of things that he can tap into help, but yet not necessarily going to help him directly. Norbert.
Well, I think the speech of our friend from the Marshall Islands underlines the importance of having a global risk financing facility and underlines the importance that more countries will be a member of this facility, because with this global risk financing facility, we can help not only these countries, they are in the focus of natural disaster, but we can help the countries that will be in the future. And he told us about the future. So I think the GRIF is able to give customized support to each country depending on the needs and the priorities of these countries. Because this GRIF is support for capacity building, for broader risk financing strategies and implementation. It is also an investment funding for insurance against extreme events, and it is targeting to the budgets, so you can do the efforts that are needed. And the second most important point is that GRIF will pool expertise and support and provide top quality knowledge work about weather, about risk data, about methodologies, and so the knowledge work will be openly accessible. It's a global public good for all. The private sector, the governments, the non-state actors that want to engage in risk finance solutions and to avoid the results of natural disasters. So I think with this facility, we have one tool to help these countries, as maybe the Marshall Islands, which are in a special part of risk.
And certainly there are other countries who are in a similar situation or so-called on the second front line, as David just mentioned, for the future. Matthew, what about from your perspective? How do you see this facility will be able to, on top of what Norbert just said, about the knowledge point, about the efforts to work with individual countries, how will they be able to really address some of the immediate pain points of countries in crisis?
Well, because we're here in Indonesia, I thought I should begin by thinking about the human cost of these crises. That's very much with us today and this week, isn't it, and this month. In addition to that human cost, each of these crises has a significant economic cost as well. And when you add up all of those crises, the impact of disasters is approximately $60 billion a year. That's a huge economic cost that has a very significant impact on the growth or lack of growth of some countries. And one of the problems is the current financing system. It is too reactive, it is too slow, it's too expensive, and it's also unpredictable. So what we are seeking to do, working with the World Bank, with Germany, with many others, is to change the whole system so that countries can rely on funding when necessary, that's reliable, that's adequate, that's rapid, and if they combine that with national systems that work well, it can have a very significant benefit compared with not having that sort of financing. Some of these crises are predictable, and so it is possible to do much more than we have currently been doing on insurance, on cool-down funds, on scalable safety nets. Funds, in short, which incentivize more rather than less prevention and preparation. And so that really is the thinking behind the GRIF, great name for this new facility. And I'm delighted to announce that the UK will, as well as Germany, be a significant partner and donor into that. So the purpose is to help countries become more resilient. That will itself reduce the number of crises and reduce the amount of suffering, both human and economic, as a result of those crises.
So now the ambition does come out. You're here to change the system. That sounds very beautiful, sir. And we'll see how they're going to change the system. Before I go back to Laura about how it's going to change the system, Laura, you got a big task over there to further explain. Let me come back to Pattery. I mean, all of us sitting here today, the reason why we are here is because we know that climate change is changing our lives. But there are those who might not be convinced. It's your job, sir, by the way, to convince them about that fact. And if you look at what's going on with the Nobel Prize recently in economics, it is for the very first time the Nobel Prize in economics is honoring economists who have been doing decades-long work linking the impact of climate change to the real impact onto our economy. Of course, it's only starting if you look at that, but still. So from the science part, you still have a lot work to do. Not just your organization. You have to line up this map in the world in order to make sure all those knowledge, information are getting through and getting deeper. Sir, about that, what can you do to make sure it will happen? Let me hear your ambition as well.
I think that we have two challenges. We have one challenge is climate mitigation, and the IPCC report that was published last Monday is really highlighting the urgency of action, and since we have started seeing the impacts of climate change, I think the motivation to act is higher, and we have started moving in the right direction, but the ambition level has been too low so far. So we have also the private sector is moving, and positive things are happening, but we are not going to reach 1.5 degrees with this level of ambition. There's a risk to reach 5 degrees and 8 degrees next century if we use all the fossil energy that we have available. And the means for reaching even 1.5 degree exist, and that was one of the main messages from the most recent IPCC report. President Obama said at his last speech at the United Nations General Assembly 3 years ago that we are the first generation to know about this problem, and we are also the last generation to solve this problem. We have about 30 years window to change our behavior, to convert our energy system to be based on non-fossil sources, nuclear, hydro, and renewables. So that's a major challenge. And besides that, we have to pay attention to climate adaptation, to early warning services, and climate services, and also water management services. And this is going to be a major challenge for especially developing countries which are not having state-of-the-art systems today.
All right. While you are quoting President Obama, I was watching our audience. When that quote came to an end, a lot of people had a deep sigh. So it really shows how we're feeling about this issue and how urgent it is. Laura, ambition. I didn't know that. It is here to change the system. So how is it likely, in a way, to change the system and the way we react? Laura. I mean, you've been constantly on a daily basis working with the World Bank on sustainable development. If there's one person I can go to, it must be you, who are monitoring how countries are doing and also how the international community is really doing it. The goal, the ambition. Ma'am.
Let me just say a couple things. First, before I answer that question, I just want to recognize what we heard from WMO on this announcement about the Alliance for Hydromet Development, which is actually a joint commitment with the World Bank, and we're very excited about it. I think it's a really good example about how we can work together to support countries to prepare for what's coming. I also want to congratulate the Marshall Islands for your work on the V20 and this upcoming summit. We're looking forward to that, and the work you're doing to take responsibility in both mitigation and adaptation. But you're talking about quotes. So I don't know how many of you in the audience listened this morning to the plenary, but President Jokowi here in Indonesia used an analogy with the Game of Thrones, and he said, winter is coming. We need to be preparing. We need to accept that this threat is here. Now, I actually listening to WMO, I feel like it's summer is coming, a really hot summer is coming. But the idea, and you've heard
we cannot hibernate, whether in summer or in winter.
But so what you're hearing from everyone is we have to accept this. It is inevitable. It's worsening, and it would be really easy to be depressed. But I think what you're hearing is a lot of positive energy coming about how, given that, some of the things we can do. So the first is obviously we need to understand our world. And, the IPCC report is really helpful. So a lot of the work that WMO and we're doing together brings information, early warning systems, a lot of knowledge, and it's helping individuals and countries anticipate, whether it's the long term or whether it's really in the short term, thinking farmers know what and when to plant, communities know that they need to evacuate when there are big storms coming. So we're getting a lot of better information, and that's really helpful. The next thing is, you heard from the bank, you heard from the Marshall Islands, we're starting to integrate these considerations into everything we do. So as we plan the trillions of dollars of infrastructure that's going to roll out over the next decades, we think about all of our economic activity, we're building in these changes and planning, and that will help reduce the cost. There's a lot of innovation and technology out there, a lot of private sector investment helping us get more resilient seeds, water-saving devices, and so on and so forth that we can help. And there are lots of opportunities to have double and triple wins. So here in Indonesia, for instance, you have new rice varieties that have both, they're more resilient, they're higher yield, and they reduce methane. Or we have schools now that we're building that can double as hurricane or cyclone shelters. Or we can plant more greenery in our cities that helps cool the cities, make them more productive, and make them more livable because you have these kind of spaces.
Every effort counts.
Every effort counts, and to the extent that we could seize these double, triple wins, there are benefits, and then you start to see, because you were talking about getting the private sector to come in, you start to see some of this interest. So when you're looking at coastal erosion, for instance, it's traditionally been public sector that had to do the support, but we're looking in West Africa at ways we can bring the hotels and the restaurants along the coast to contribute because it's in their interest to also prevent the erosion. And so they may help with seawalls or mangrove plantation or groins, et cetera, to participate. So you're starting to bring this. Now, the last point then I just want to make on these insurance instruments, and you heard the savings, $1 invested saves $4. We heard about GRIF, which I think is a fantastic initiative. I'm really grateful for the contributions from the UK and Germany, and we were talking about climate, but expanding it to other kinds of risks so that but we also heard about PCRAFI. We have other kinds of community resilience, adapted safety nets. We were talking about all these new instruments that will help us if we learn about the best practice and we invest now, and then these financial resources are available when events happen, we can help buffer either at the household level or at the national level these accounts. They can get the cash they need, and that makes them much stronger, much more resilient, much more able to adapt, and to continue to develop without losing or these huge losses you've heard about each time these big events happen. So I choose to be optimistic in the face of this. I think that collectively the people who work on it have a lot of good ideas and innovation, and we can make progress.
we all have this sense of urgency, but overall speaking, we all need to be, and there's no other choice to be optimistic about what needs to be done, and we will be able to do it. Before we wrap it up, I really want to ask from a journalistic perspective. You know, we talk beautifully, this GRIF, Global Risks Financing Facility. I want everybody to remember this, because when crises happen, we can go there and tap in the resources and make sure we can be helped. Having said that, though, is everything too little, too late? I want to have a wrap-up sentence or two from every one of you before we end this discussion to our audience. Let me start coming from Mr. Bad News, but certainly proactive effort from the meteorological science perspective. Petteri.
So this adaptation is very essential. We have to build better multi-hazard early warning services to prevent the losses that we will anyhow face during the coming 50 years. And we are very grateful for World Bank for agreeing to build a new alliance with us to help countries to improve their national services. And of course, climate mitigation remains to be a major challenge, but we have to adapt as well.
Yes, I want to get the list of crises you are talking about after this discussion. I want to know them down. Thank you, sir. And Matthew.
Well, it's definitely possible, but if we are to save the planet and if we are to save humanity, then we need to be doing stuff in a qualitatively different way than we've ever done before. Not just the public sector, not just the private sector, not just civil society, but everyone coming together and acting together.
It is not a cliche, by the way, that
Good.
adaptation is the intelligence of human being, really, and we need to work together. And Norbert?
You talked about changing the system. I think the most important idea of the grid is not to help after a disaster, but to have a financing system pre-arranged before the disaster is coming. That's the most important idea.
Thank you so much. That's exactly where the adaptation is. And shall we?
Well, to answer your question, no, it's never too late. And it cannot be business as usual. And, you know, if there's a will, there's a way.
As easy as that, but as important as that. And Laura, finally,
Yeah, well,
at last.
He said what I was going to say. Essentially, it's too little, but it's not too late. We really need to build the momentum and increase our ambition, change fundamentally the way we do our planning, our investment, and all of our activities.
That is coming from someone who is doing sustainable development on a daily basis, coming from the World Bank. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen on the panel. Really thank you for your input. Congratulations to GRIF. Thank you. 谢谢. Thank you so much. I want to not only have our panelists here on the stage, but also some of the important people that have been making sure to have this GRIF happen. Please come up to the stage and we'll have a group photo together so that we make the system change, right? Okay. So ladies and gentlemen, joining us, those who are playing instrumental roles for the GRIF. Thank you.
Thank you.
At the same time, I want to thank our panelists. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Laura, I have to